Your word, O Lord, is the lamp to our feet.
and the light to our path.
The first reading is from Hebrews chapter 13, verse 1 to 8, verse 15 to 16. Keep on loving one another as Christians. Remember to welcome strangers in your homes. There were some who did that and welcomed angels without knowing you. Remember those who are in prison, as though you were in prison with them. Remember those who are suffering, as though you were suffering as they are. Marriage is to be honored by all, and husband and wives must be faithful to each other. God will judge those who are immoral and those who commit adultery. Keep your lives free from the love of money and be satisfied with what you have. For God has said, I will never leave you, I will never abandon you. Let us be bold then and say, the Lord is my helper, I will not be afraid. What can anyone do to me? Remember your former leaders who spoke God's message to you. Think back on how they lived and died and imitate their faith. Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today and forever. Let us then always offer praise to God as our sacrifice through Jesus, which is the offering presented by lips that confess Him as Lord. Do not forget to do good and to help one another, because these are the sacrifices that please God. The second reading is from Luke chapter 14, verse 1, 7 to 14. On one occasion, when Jesus was going to the house of a leader of the Pharisees to eat a meal on the Sabbath, they were watching him closely. When he noticed how the guests chose the places of honor, he told them a parable. When you are invited by someone to a wedding banquet, do not sit down at the place of honor, in case someone more distinguished than you has been invited by your host. And the host who invited both of you may come and say to you, give this person your place, and then in disgrace you would start to take the lowest place. But when you are invited, go and sit down at the lowest place, so that when your host comes, he may say to you, friend, move up higher. Then you will be honored in the presence of all who sit at the table with you. For all who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. He said also to the one who had invited him, when you give a luncheon or dinner, do not invite your friends or your brothers and sisters, or your relatives or rich neighbors, in case they might invite you in return, and you will be repaid. But when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind, and you will be blessed, because they cannot repay you, for you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Do you have a favorite spot in the pews in church whenever you are here for worship? Do you get upset when someone has taken a spot? But for many of us, being creatures of habit, we are used to the same spot. Well, I often do that in class when attending lectures. However, for some, the sitting position holds a great deal more value than mere habits. For example, in a family dinner. So for similar reasons, some people may insist on sitting in the same spot in church even when someone else has already occupied it. You see, in the first century Palestine, in the Hellenistic world of the time, while sitting was common during meals, reclining on one's left elbow, that's what they would do. They would recline on their left elbow on a low table or on a low couch, and they would eat with their right hand. That was a very prevalent practice for groups of festive meals or banquets. The practice held great value for meal sharing. It somehow created a very intimate setting for people to just recline as they eat. They can actually lean against or more forward to communicate over the meal. And biblical scholar Dennis Smith notes that such meals serve as a means of creating and solidifying social bonds. And where a person was positioned indicated their social status among the attendees. The place of honor was immediately to the right of the host, and then continue on around the table in the decreasing order, leaving the lowest guest at the far end of that U-shaped setting, as you may see on the screen. And it was not uncommon for the lower guests to receive lower quality food and wine than what was being served to the host and the honored guests, or the more honored guests. However, some other scholars believe that the most honored guest sat closest to the right and to the left of the host, with the least honored at the far end. That's based on Mark chapter 10, which states that James and John requested Jesus that they could sit at the right and at the left of Jesus at his glory. But it doesn't really matter to us where the most honored guests sit, on the left or on the right, or just on the right of the host. But what is important to us would be that such communal meals had become so valued that the afterlife came to be viewed as a grand banquet at the end of time. If you refer back to Isaiah 25, verse 6 particularly, Isaiah prophesies that here on Mount Zion the Lord Almighty will prepare a banquet for all the nations of the world, a banquet of richest food and the finest wine. And Jesus used this end-time banquet imagery in many of his parables. Namely, one of them, in Matthew chapter 22, Jesus compares the kingdom of heaven to a wedding banquet that the king prepares for his son. So with this social and theological background in mind, let us use it as a backdrop for today's narrative that we just heard. Let us journey with Jesus into the banquet that he was invited into and learn what is prepared for us. You see, when Jesus noticed at the meal how the guests chose the places of honor, he told them a parable. But not just simply a parable, but it was a parable told in the second person, that is directed to you. He said, when someone invites you to a wedding banquet, do not sit down at the place of honor, in case someone more distinguished than you has been invited too. And the host comes and says to you, give this person your place, and then in this place you would start to take the lowest place. But when you are invited, go and sit down at the lowest place, so that when your host may invite you, friends move up higher, then you will be honored in the presence of all at the table. Now we may imagine the Pharisees and the teachers of the law jostle and choke each other. Now, pretentiously polite, but still fighting for the prestigious spots near the host, not wanting to land in the lowest places. It appears to be an ugly scene. So in this instance, Jesus seems to be offering wise advice on proper table manners and etiquette. But to the first century hearers who lived in an honor-shame culture, who are sensitive to issues of status and recognition, Jesus' words should make sense. You see, living in such a culture, when asked by the host to move to a low position at a social gathering, the person would feel humiliated for not knowing their position and thinking too highly of themselves. Hence, moving lower would mean a drop in their prestige and a social status. Therefore, Jesus' advice is wise. However, it is counterculture for those Jewish leaders. They would not shame themselves first by choosing the lower seats for a chance to be honored. What would you do if you invited to such a banquet? Then Jesus addressed the host, saying, "When you give a feast, do not invite your friends or relatives or rich neighbors who may invite you in return, repaying you. But when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind, who cannot repay you." But similarly, the host would find Jesus' advice ridiculous, since the ultimate intent of the host in throwing the banquet is to gain prestige and honor. He was too self-absorbed to have the needy and the underprivileged in mind. What would you do as the host? By these parables, Jesus is calling his listeners, as well as all of us, to a change of hearts and mindsets. That is, inner transformation and a new way of living. Jesus is calling us to renounce the values and ways of acting in the current society that counter God's way. Instead of giving a great importance to merit, to honor, and to privilege, Jesus calls us to be humble in spirit in all aspects of life. You see, Jesus demonstrated this spirit of humility throughout his life and his ministry. He dined not only with Jewish leaders, but also shared meals with sinners, tax collectors, and other social outcasts. He didn't judge the woman who was caught in adultery, and he touched the religious or the religiously unclean people. The man who was born blind, he actually spat and put spittle mixed with mud on the eyes, and many others. even let those who are unclean to touch him as he healed them. If you remember the story of the woman that was bleeding for 12 years, he let her touch his clothes, but literally touching him. And rather than allowing the lowest guest at the Last Supper to serve the others, he served every guest himself by washing their feet. Now, in telling these two parables, Jesus is not simply teaching us good table manners and etiquette. Jesus wants us to prepare ourselves for the kingdom of God, which in the Gospels is often referred to as a wedding banquet. Hence, the first parable of advice concludes in verse 11 with, in God's kingdom, there is the eternal banquet. All who humble themselves before God, who is the eternal host, will be exalted. And those who exalt themselves will be humbled. And the second parable concludes in verse 14 with, God, who is the eternal host, will reward us at the eternal banquet at our resurrection with Christ's return. So if we think we deserve the best place at the eternal banquet that is in God's kingdom, but then think again, we need to be humble in spirit. Do not in any sense look down on others for the way they dress or they act or they even smell. Do not let pride and conceit get in our way, tainting our service to God and people. We are called to be humble in spirit, especially in our relationship with God and with people. But at the same time, if we think we only deserve the lowest place in the banquet, then think again. We ought not be self-abased, thinking that we are nobody and we don't deserve God's grace. On the contrary, we need to be strengthened and accept our privileged status as children of God, daughters and sons of God. Regardless of our age, gender, race, culture, or social status, whether we are physically or mentally able or not, we are all welcome at church, at God's table. Every person is the same and valued in God's eyes. All that is required of us is to be humble in spirit, because only a humble person will be reliant on God and trust in God. Matthew chapter 5, verse 5 reassures us that happy are those who are humble, for they will receive what God has promised. When in God's kingdom, we are invited to present ourselves before God with empty hands, so that God may fill them. The absolute honor will be given to us by God. And only when we are truly humble in spirit will we look to God and acknowledge earnestly that everything is a gift. Everything is God's grace. We do not need to jostle and to show others. We are called and given a place of honor in God's kingdom by changing our way of seeing things through Jesus' eyes. Indeed, today's first reading from Hebrews chapter 13 reminds us that as Christians, we are to keep on loving one another. Extend hospitality even to strangers. Empathize with those who are imprisoned and journey with those who are suffering. Honor our marriages, remaining faithful to each other. Do good and help one another, because these are the sacrifices that please God. Are we doing all this for God's kingdom? So in a nutshell, Jesus wants us to be humble in spirit, so that we do not let pride and conceit lure us away from God and estrange our relationships with God and with others. When we are humble in spirit, our service to God and to others will be genuine and earnest, from the heart, and not for any self-gain. We will live each day actively, seeking to please God by serving others humbly. So let us answer God's call